When my own son told me Christmas was only for real family, I loaded every wrapped gift, the honey-baked ham, and our heirloom stockings into my old Subaru. I drove past his perfect cul-de-sac with the synchronized light show and took our entire holiday to the women's shelter off Lorraine Avenue. The volunteers gasped when I carried in Tyler's Lego set and Madison's pink scooter and said, "Tonight, this is where my family eats." I'm Margaret, 66, a retired third-grade teacher in Cleveland Heights, the kind who keeps peppermints in her purse and a list of birthdays on the fridge. Eric is my only son, a VP with a navy blazer and a calendar full of client dinners, married to Brooke, who curates Christmas like a Pinterest board. Last spring, I opened my home to Kayla, a 17-year-old from our church foster program, smart as a whip and learning to trust her own laugh again. When Eric announced he'd host Christmas Eve in Westlake this year, he texted a color-coded schedule with a dress code and an RSVP link. That was before he decided to add 3 words that cut deeper than any Ohio wind: real family only. I lay out my arthritis pills in the day of the week box, tie on my red apron, and thumb my mother's recipe card for pecan pie, smudged with butter. Kayla and I strung popcorn for the tree while the Hallmark Channel murmured in the background, and we laughed when the string snapped and showered the rug. On Thursdays, I volunteer at the church coat drive, handing out mittens and telling kids to tuck their chins into their scarves like my own used to. I left my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, a still warm loaf of pumpkin bread, then labeled stockings for Tyler, Madison, Brooke, Eric, and yes, one for Kayla. The ping of Eric's message cut through the carols. "Mom, small head count this year. Just real family, okay?" "She's not blood, Mom," he said, like Kayla were a stray I'd fed once, and I stared at the ornament his father carved the winter before the cancer. I told him about stockings and second chances, about how our table always had an extra chair, and he sighed the sigh of a man late to a meeting. Brooke chimed in later with a politely frosted voice. "We just want a traditional vibe this year," as if kindness were tinsel you could peel off. I hung up, set out the nativity my grandmother brought from Boston, and felt something settle in me, old steel under all my Midwestern soft. The next morning, while snow dusted the sidewalk, I made a list that did not include begging my own child for permission to love. This is the part where a grandmother decides whose rules make a family, and I promise you my answer did not fit on his RSVP form. I will tell you how I packed that Subaru who showed up when I flipped the script, and what Eric said when he realized the chairs at his table were empty. I will tell you what happened to the gifts with their crisp Target bows and the check I once set aside for his kids' college fund. If you've ever been told love needs a blood test or a gate code, pull up a chair, because you'll want to hear how Christmas found its way home. If you believe chosen family matters more than bragging rights on a holiday photo wall, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what came next. Because this is the story of how a son tried to shrink Christmas, and his mother made it big enough to hold the ones he left out. Because this is the story of how a son tried to shrink Christmas, and his mother made it big enough to hold the ones he left out. I didn't sleep the night after his message. I lay under the Afghan my sister crocheted the winter before she moved to Arizona, the TV painting the ceiling with the soft glow of a rerun, where someone inevitably got the Christmas miracle. The house had its own nighttime soundtrack, the radiator knocking in its old bones, a plow groaning down cedar, wind worrying the eaves, Kayla's door opening around 2, padding steps to the kitchen for a glass of water and back. When I finally dozed, it was to a dream of stockings without names, limp as empty pockets. In the morning, I pressed my palm to the window and the cold came right through to my wrist. On my counter, the list I'd made the day before in my neat teacher script. It had groceries for pies, a reminder to wrap Madison's art set, the card addresses, a note to ask Mrs. Patel if her daughter would be home from Ohio State. I added a new line, "Call Pastor Lena." Not because I wanted approval for loving a child who had done nothing but be brave enough to accept it. Because our church had wrapped its arms around Kayla when she first came to my door with her social worker and a canvas tote, and I knew this would ripple. Kayla came into the kitchen with her sweatshirt sleeves tucked over her fingers, hair high in a messy bun. It still startled me sometimes. How at home she'd become. How that first week of perching on the edge of chairs had given way to leaning. Her eyes flicked to my phone. She'd heard the ping, seen my face. I passed her a banana and a cinnamon toast. I said, "Your bus is in 13, because you learn not to lead with your worry," and she smirked at "bus in 13" the way she always did when I treated minutes like math problems. When she reached for the butter, I took a breath. feeling the old steel I'd named to myself the night before. "Sweet pea," I said. "We might change our Christmas plans." She asked, and I hated that she'd learned to preempt humiliation with a joke. "You are my family," I said. "That's the whole thing." I carried it in, and the smell of new fabric and ginger candles puffed out like a sigh when I slid it open. Inside, 4 matching white knit stockings with pom-poms on the cuffs and gold script names embroidered on the band. Eric, Brooke, Tyler, Madison. There was no 5th with my name for their mantle, and certainly not one for Kayla. Tucked under the tissue paper was a handwritten card, Brooke's careful loopy print. Thought these would look beautiful for Christmas Eve. Would you mind bringing the heirloom ones just for the mantle photo? Maybe the kids only... They're the ones we want to focus on this year. XO. It was such a small sentence, and it knocked a glass off a shelf in my body. The heirloom ones. The ones my mother embroidered at the Formica table the winter my father lost his job at the trim factory, with thread she bought secondhand. My mother's stitch was a little irregular. She'd been left-handed, and the pattern had right-handed instructions. I could still see her lip caught between her teeth, the radio on low, a Methodist hymn humming under her breath. Every year we added a name. The year Eric was born, we thought we might not have enough thread. We did, somehow. When he married Brooke, I stitched her name myself. Careful, drawing a heart in pencil first to steady my hand. The year after Richard died, I asked Kayla what color she liked best and found a spool to match. I remember how my knuckles ached, but the name on that band warmed my hands. Brooke's note asked me to edit my own history. I called Eric back. He answered on the second ring, voice oh so calm like he was preemptively soothing me. "Hey, Mom," Eric said, and I could hear keyboard taps in the background. He was always in 2 rooms at once when he talked to me now, one with me, one with his calendar. "Just the kids' stockings for the mantle photo?" I said, keeping my voice even. "It'll look cleaner," he said. "We're keeping it classic. No offense, but the old ones are a little... eclectic." Then he switched to his reasonable voice, the one that had gotten him promoted. "Mom, it's 24 hours, one evening, it's not... A stylist is coming to do the tablescape. They want candid photos, and it'll run in January. It'd be a little confusing if Kayla were there. We can't explain every context in a caption. We've been over this. It's one night. And about the donations. Try not to bring the coat drive into things. We don't want to make the kids feel like charity is what Christmas is about." After I hung up, I took the old stockings out of the cedar chest anyway. Sometimes you have to hold what you're fighting for. The cedar smell rose up, and my hands remembered where each needle had gone in. I laid them across the table, faded red and cream next to the crisp white pom-poms Brooke had chosen. You could have asked me to choose between a family portrait with perfect light and one with a coffee stain and one eye closed. I would choose the coffee stain every time because it proves a body lived there. I took Kayla with me to the church that afternoon. The fellowship hall was a mess of scarves and boxes, the kind of chaos that meant good had been done. Pastor Lena stood with a clipboard, hair tucked into a beanie. She is maybe 45, with laugh lines and an old soul, and learned quickly that a pot of coffee solves at least half the world's problems. She hugged me hard, then Kayla. "You girls keeping warm?" she said. She always called us girls when she wanted to align herself beside us, not above. I told her about Eric's message, kept my voice light because we had mittens to hand and no one needed my tears in a box of hats. She did what good pastors do. She kept her face open, which is like saying, "I hear you, and I will not fix you because you are not broken." On the way out, she touched my sleeve. "Can you stop by my office for a second?" We stepped into the small room with the crooked cross that some Sunday school kid had made out of beans and glue in the 70s. She sat, folded her hands, and said very gently, "I got a call." "Just for the holiday," he said. He was very respectful. He said he thought maybe it would be less confusing for the little ones for Kayla to be at a different home for Christmas. He wondered if we had any families who might be available, and that if Kayla and her caregiver want respite, we can support that choice, not the other way around. You do not have to apologize for existing. The Hallmark Channel had moved on to another predictable parade of misunderstandings and hot chocolate. In the glow, her profile looked older. When she finished, she stood and handed me the plate. "If you want to go to Westlake and I should go somewhere else, it's okay." "I get it," she said, and I thought for the 1,000th time how cruel the world is that it makes children offer to vanish so the adults can take a nice picture. "Baby," I said, and she let me hold her for a long time until my shirt was damp. Later, when she went up to do homework, I took out the checkbook. I had tucked a check for Tyler and Madison's 529s in my desk drawer weeks before. A small thing, but a tradition. I held it between my fingers like a hot coal. It wasn't about the money. It was about where I was placing the weight of my love. I slid the check into the back of my recipe box instead. The pecan pie card went back on top, butter smudged and sure. My phone buzzed on the counter with a group chat light like a lantern. Christmas Eve Logistics, Brooke had titled it, with a Christmas tree and a gold star. It was me, Eric, Brooke, and, because of course she had looped them, the McGuire's personal assistant. A list scrolled. Arrival 4, 30, Candids, 5, Ewazero 5, 30, Children's Carol 5, 45, Dinner 6, Darrow, Toast 6, 45, please, no off-topic remarks. Keep it joyful and festive. Cookies and cocoa. 7, 30, board members. Drop in. 8:00. Dress code, creams, navy, and 1 pop of red. Please avoid white sneakers. Gifts, keep minimal, experiences preferred. Please no rescue narratives in front of the children. Remember, we don't want to make anyone feel awkward. It was that last line that did it. Like she had typed my life into quotation marks. Got it, I typed, and then erased it. Looking forward to it, I typed, and erased that too. I put the phone face down, then picked it back up and typed, noted. Sometimes one word says, I saw what you did there, and I have your number. I got a text from my friend Darlene then, as if the universe knows when to send someone who remembers what you were like when you were 25 and feared nothing but running out of mascara in the church bathroom. Coffee? I'm at George's if you can get here in 10, it read. George's Kitchen is the kind of place where you can sit all afternoon for the price of 1 refill, and your waitress will show you pictures of her grandson whether you asked or not. Darlene waved me over, glasses on her head like a headband, lipstick a little too bright for the gray Cleveland afternoon, which is precisely how I like mine. She slid a menu to me I didn't need and said, Start from the top. He's been embarrassed of your open door since he was 12, and you let the McCready boys sleep on the couch after their mother locked them out, she said. Darlene had a memory like a filing cabinet. He's always wanted you to himself, and he never forgave you for loving out loud. Now he married a woman to whom a plate is a project. Put them together, and you've got this. He was a good boy, I said softly, because that's the complicating thing about raising a child. You remember the science fair posters and the way he used to fall asleep in the back seat, and you don't throw those away just because he grew up into someone who forgot what you taught him. He's still a good boy, Darlene said. He's behaving badly. There's a difference. But you don't owe his bad behavior your soul. Also, she said, malice gleeful, I saw Brooke's Instagram story. It's a partnership with Hearth and Hearth. They don't mean to be cruel, Darlene said. But they are. And sometimes incidental cruelty is worse than planned, because it wears perfume. So, what are you going to do? Back home, I took out the red plaid tablecloth, spread it over my dining table, and ran my palm along its creases like a map. My mother used to iron it on the table itself, laying a towel under the iron because the iron was older than me and leaked. I set the nativity too, and when I held the wooden Mary, her thumb was worn smooth from years of being rubbed by worried fingers. There's that story, that there was no room at the inn. People imagine it was because the inn was full. I am not convinced. Sometimes people just don't make room because the extra chair looks messy. Eric sent one more text that night, privately this time. Hey, some last quick ones. Can you bring the honey-baked ham? And easy on the cinnamon candles. Brooke wrote about an alcohol allergy person. Scents can trigger. Oh, and you still have the kids' Santa letters, right? Would be a cute photo. Just like that. My love turned into a bullet point in his show. I didn't write back. The next afternoon, I had to go to Westlake anyway to drop off a scarf Brooke had left at Thanksgiving. I hesitated as long as I could, used the time to assemble goodie bags for the King's College kids who still came around for cocoa and to shovel. Kayla sat at the table doing mock SAT questions, lips moving as she reasoned out whether the comma belonged or not. When I told her where I was going, she froze again and then asked if she could come. We stood in assumption for a moment. What would it be like if she walked into that curated cul-de-sac? And then we decided against it without speaking. I took the Subaru. It has a rattle in the back somewhere I haven't managed to place, and a sticker on the bumper that says, "Be kind. You never know." When I pulled up to Eric's, the synchronized light show was already set to gentle carols, a snowman inflated on the lawn, bloating and deflating with the air pump's breath. The wreath on the door was a crisp circle of cedar and white berries. I had known he had a camera by the garage, but I hadn't realized there was another one above the doorbell until it pinged my phone with visitor at Eric and Brooke. Technology politely telling me I was being watched. Brooke opened the door in her navy sweater and a pair of jeans I know cost more than my first car. "Hi," she said, bright. "You caught us in the middle of a trial run," he said, and I leaned down to cup his face in my hands, breathing in his little boy ferociousness. "We're making cookies," he shouted. "But we can't eat them yet because they need pictures." He whispered that last part, even though there was no need. "Bud, inside voice," Eric said, appearing from the kitchen with a towel flung over his shoulder like a brief. He hugged me the way men hug when they feel ambushed. 1 arm, 3 pats. "Glad you brought the scarf," he said. "Brooke's been looking for that." "Quick thing, Mom," he said, glancing toward the kitchen where I could see the refrigerator covered in black and white photos in grid frames. "We're using the dining room and living room for the shoot tomorrow, so when you come, just stick to the kitchen as much as you can, okay? We'll do the toast in the foyer. Lighting's better there. I'll show you where to put the ham." She touched the gold chain at her throat. "Margaret," she said, syrup salted with vinegar, "we love that you have such a heart. It's just, the McGuires are conservative, and they don't really understand the whole foster thing. It could be a little controversial. You know I grew up with chaos," she said, snapping her eyes briefly at her own mother's absence from these kinds of scenes. "I worked so hard to build stability for my kids. This," she gestured at her house's curated calm, "this makes me feel safe. I need it to be this way." "Safety built on exclusion is brittle," I said. "It cracks the first time anything warm touches it." "I'll think about it," I said, and walked out into the bite of December. I sat in the Subaru and put my forehead on the steering wheel. My hands shook a little. Across the street, the neighbor's inflatable reindeer bent backwards in the wind like it had given up. The driveway camera was a dull black eye. I imagined the footage later, my shoulders hunched, my coat buttoned wrong for once, and the small file name under the clip, Wednesday, 3rd, 12 p.m., Mom. I started the car but didn't put it in gear. Instead, I called Darlene. "He said I pick strays," I told her. "You pick people," she said fiercely. "And if you want to, you can pick me up for dinner, because I have a pork chop in the freezer that's probably older than your Subaru, and we can make a dent in that as a symbol. Are you going out there tomorrow with your plaid tablecloth and your old stockings to be edited again? Or are you going to use your own table for what it is? You don't have to punish him. You can simply stop cooperating." I wondered if she would watch this later, or if the footage would just stack up with the rest of their clever security. Boxes within boxes. Myth of control. I pulled a sticky note from my purse and a pen that had a Santa hat on the cap. In the squared-up letters I used for my students, I wrote, "Family is who you make room for." I didn't know yet that it would end up in their house later like a ghost's hand, a note tucked under bow, a message set to haunt. That evening after dinner, soup and grilled cheese again, because the heat of a good soup solves what ails, Kayla and I sat with the stockings. She traced her finger over her name. "No one's ever written my name like that," she said. "Old-fashioned?" I asked. "Permanent," she said. Somewhere around 9, my phone bleeped with a new email. It was a forward I wasn't supposed to receive, and I know that only because the universe has a sense of humor. Brooke had meant to email the stylist and the photographer and had typed M into the address bar and selected the wrong Margaret. I opened it. Subject, final shot list, important. The body of the email was a bulleted list that told a whole story in words without verbs. Entry shot, wreath plus foursome. Mantle shot, stockings, no extras. Grandma, minimal. She's sweet but goes off script. Keep talking points handy traditions. Children, cookie decorating candid. Note, avoid foster program mention, sensitive neighbors. Toast shot, board member clink, feature Eric by tree. Gifts, college envelope reveal, capture emotion. Kayla looked up, face going small in the way you do when you think the danger is coming out of nowhere. "It's not you," I said, holding up a hand. My voice sounded strange, even to me. I forwarded the email to myself, and then set my phone down. I could feel my heart in my wrists. "He asked the pastor to send you away," I said quietly, And Brooke thinks you're a bad headline. I can say I'm sick. It had 3 skull and crossbones next to the items that mattered. Ham, candles, stockings, toys. It had note with a heart. Before bed, I called Eric. The call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message I would regret. I simply said, "We'll be making other arrangements." I didn't say where, I didn't say how. I would leave room in that silence for him to feel the shape of what he had shoved aside. The next morning, the snow made a crisp sound under my boots. I woke before the sun and put on my red apron, not because I needed it, but because sometimes armor looks like a cheerful print. I wrapped Tyler's Lego set, the expensive one with the tiny astronauts, in blue paper with silver stars and placed it in the bin. I wrapped Madison's pink scooter and remembered her last summer barreling down my sidewalk with a helmet too big for her head, singing an off-key version of Baby Shark. I tucked in the gingerbread kit, the art set, the book about a stubborn donkey I'd gotten Tyler because I thought it would make him laugh. I set aside the check again, and then my hand moved on its own to tear it in half. That was when I heard the first ping of the morning. It was Eric, earlier than he ever wrote unless he needed to cancel on me. "Update on tonight," he wrote. "We're a little tight on seating after all. Brooke's cousin is stopping by. Maybe come for cookies at 7:30 instead of dinner?" Less complicated. An ellipsis hanging like a string of lights about to snap. "Mom," he finally wrote, "don't be dramatic. Don't make me be the bad guy." She smiled then, and it was like the sun had come to sit a while on my banister. I loaded the Subaru. The ham went in the back, the stockings on the passenger seat like honored guests. Cinnamon candles in a box that had once held oranges. My mother's tablecloth tucked snug. I tucked the note into my coat pocket. I patted the pocket like I was checking for keys. On the way, I stopped at the drugstore for batteries because if there's one thing you learn, it's that no gift reaches its potential if it comes without power. In the candy aisle, the cashier, a kid who couldn't have been older than Kayla, looked at my armful of AA packs and said, "Someone's getting Luckies," and then blushed like he'd said something dirty. "Merry Christmas," he said, rushing the words. "Same to you," I said, and meant it. I turned right at the stoplight instead of left. I drove past Westlake with its water features and its carefully pruned bushes. I drove past the Starbucks where the moms in yoga pants would be tonight, and I wished them the kind of quiet that comes after you stop trying to be the picture. I drove down Lorraine, past the diner with the plastic pies in the case, past the pawn shop already stringing lights in its window, past the old flats where I picture my grandparents on their first date, awkward knees touching under a table too small. The shelter sits in a brick building that used to be a school, and I could still see, through all the coats and the years, the outlines of cinder block painted the color my third graders once called seafoam but wrong. When I pulled in, the lot was half full. Volunteers in orange vests were lugging boxes, looking tired, and gave me your mittens once after I'd pressed mine into a kid's hands. Sierra, who runs the place and used to be a student of mine, met me at the door because the doorbell camera had pinged. "Mrs. F," she said, even though I've told her 100 times to call me Margaret now that she's grown enough to run a shelter. "We weren't expecting you." Kayla held a door open, and then another, her eyes bright and brightened, and the cinnamon candles made the air smell like the good kind of memory. I set the stockings on the table like I was laying out a ledger of truth. Names, names, names. There was no editor here. There were just people. I set the plaid cloth and smoothed it with my palms. My mother would have approved of how I tucked the corners, how I made it fit a table it hadn't been sized for. We're good at that. The women in my family, making things fit places they weren't designed for. By the time the ham had made the room smell like every Christmas of my life, I was ready to call Eric. I would tell him what I had done, and he would hear the steel under the soft. He would say something ugly, or he would not say anything at all. But before I could press call, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a photo of Eric and Brooke in the foyer, taken by the stylist moments before, the golden light just so. 4 white stockings hung on the mantel. Eric's arm was around Brooke. The caption read, "There's nothing like keeping tradition with the ones who matter most." No one believed I'd do it, least of all the boy I raised on cocoa and choir rehearsals. But if you were there in that old school, with its windows fogged up and its tables too low, you would have believed something else instead. That sometimes the inn is full because people forgot how to open their doors. And sometimes a woman with a red apron and a stubborn streak walks in and says, "We're making room." The kids keep asking where you are. We waited to do the toast. But I'm still a teacher. I went back downstairs, turned off the lamp next to the camel in the nativity because he was getting a sunburn, and sat at the table with the stockings laid out like a map of the heartlands. My hands found the uneven K in Kayla's name, the loop I'd made too big and never corrected. My phone lit up one more time with a text from Darlene. "How'd it go?" she wrote. "Big," I wrote back. It was big enough. There are nights when you can hear your own spine growing ideas. This was one. In Westlake, in a beautiful house with white stockings and navy sweaters, my son poured sparkling cider into coupe glasses and didn't say the toast he had planned because the person who always said the blessing was at a different table. In my kitchen, in a house with mismatched mugs, I whispered a blessing to the cold December air anyway. Tradition isn't the picture. It's the promise. And mine had nothing in it about real family except this. You can tell who's real by who makes room. There's a kind of morning light Cleveland saves just for Christmas, a gray that is not an apology so much as an insistence. This is the world right now, soft and honest. I woke to it and to the scent of cinnamon rolls from a can, the kind you pop and startle yourself with because I had decided we were allowed ease. Kayla had her hair down and an apron over pajamas that said, "I came to slay." A terrible pun that made her look like a kid in the way I want for her more often than life permits. She was standing on one foot to reach the top shelf for the nutmeg, her tongue peeking out at the corner of her mouth in concentration. The kitchen window had a lace of frost around the edges, the single string of lights we always leave on all night casting it gold. "Morning," she said, and there was none of the old watchfulness in her voice. A small miracle. "Morning," I said back, and kissed the top of her head just because I could. "We're keeping it small and true," I said, meaning we would make it big enough to hold what mattered. The doorbell rang at 8:12, and I told myself it would be Darlene with a foil pan and a grin, or Mrs. Patel with a poinsettia she'd swear she picked up on sale. When I opened it, there was my son, hatless despite the cold, hair neatly combed, a fold between his eyebrows like a note of dissatisfaction someone had tucked there. Brooke stood half a step behind him in a camel coat, the kind you buy at a price that suggests you're buying into an idea as much as a garment. She had a rolled-up cylinder in her hand that turned out to be a set of papers. The seal from a printer was visible near the edge. Tyler and Madison were in the back seat of their SUV up at the curb, faces pressed to the glass, waving like eager puppies who haven't learned to read the room. "Mom," Eric said. And then his eyes slid past me like he could see the whole house, measuring the chaos. "Can we come in for a minute?" Brooke's eyes flicked to her, then away, landing on the wreath I'd made out of clippings from our backyard and ribbon I'd saved in a drawer. "This isn't a good time," I said, because reflex tells you to be polite when a storm comes to your porch. Then I remembered who I was. "Actually, it is. Come in if you can manage to be decent about it." She held her papers like an umbrella, and I thought, well, there's the weather. The living room was itself. Tree with the bottom third of ornaments clustered because of little hands over the years, an Afghan, a coffee mug with a chipped handle that reads, "Ohio against the world," a drop of white wax on the end table from last night's candle that I hadn't scraped off because little imperfect things are proof of last night's joy. The stockings were out on the table again because I liked to look at them, as if repetition could make an idea unassailable. "We brought something," Eric said, like a salesman about to reveal a sample. He unrolled the cylinder and smoothed the papers on the coffee table next to the nativity. He didn't ask. He assumed the right to place. "What is it?" I asked, even though I had the distinct sensation of a cliff in my body. "It's just a family agreement," Brooke said quickly, that bright, not-quite voice of hers. "Nothing legal, just clarifying expectations for the health of the holidays moving forward." "Read it," I said. "Use your lawyer voice. I want to hear exactly what you think I'm agreeing to." For this purpose, immediate family means Eric, Brooke, their children, and grandparents by blood or marriage. No foster placements, boarders, congregants, or community partners in attendance during core events. We can do service together another time. No mention of personal family arrangements, including but not limited to fostering, will be made in any public forum without prior written consent. Clause 3. The heirloom stockings and related holiday artifacts, table linens, nativity, etc., will be transferred to Eric and Brooke's home for safekeeping and display, effective immediately, to root the tradition with the nuclear family. Margaret will receive replicas to display when hosting. He had put my mother into a photocopier. Clause 4. Any monetary gifts related to the children's education will be presented in private, not as part of a group toast, to avoid any perception of leveraging philanthropy for influence. Clause 5. For the children's development of stable attachments, Margaret agrees not to introduce new placements. He blinked as if I'd broken a script. You haven't read them all, Brooke said, and there was a tremor under her sweet that I recognized. Fear of the world not bending. There's a clause about the magazine follow-up we want to do in spring. We thought this would be easier to just... You're always talking about boundaries. This is us setting them. We need order. The kids were confused last night. Tyler asked why Kayla wasn't in the pictures, and we didn't know how to explain without confusing. We just need it to look a certain way so Tyler and Madison have stability. I grew up without it. You know that. I'm trying to build a world where I know where everything goes. It is hard to be gentle with someone whose fear is dressed as control. But it is necessary. Kayla had stayed in the doorway the whole time, not hiding, not stepping forward, waiting like she'd learned from this how to picture herself. When Eric read the first clause, she jerked like she'd been slapped, then went still, the stillness that takes practice. I'm not respite, she said quietly, and it cut the room. I'm not... They keep saying it like it's a program, but I can hear what they mean. I'm trying to do both things. Career, family, I need it to be clean somewhere. It doesn't fit. He froze, and for a second his eyes flicked to mine with something like surprise that I'd be firm while being kind. He reached anyway, picking up the one with his own name as if claiming it would prove he was right. His hand, that hand that I had taught to hold a pencil, to cup water and not spill, went next to the red felt band that held Kayla's name. He put 2 fingers on it, like he could slide it away, and that's when the sound in my chest changed. He touched one of mine. I reached out and took his wrist, not hard, but with the kind of grip that says, I brought you into this world, and I'm not above reminding you of it. He stilled. He had forgotten I have steel, because it's wrapped in flower and hymns. You don't get to hold my grandmother's thread in one hand and your wife's algorithm in the other, and tell me they're the same kind of thing, I said. Quiet as a snowdrift you don't realize is the reason your car won't move. Put them down. You and I have both been girls at a table where we were told there wasn't a seat and we should be grateful for crumbs. We could stop that here. Then she straightened and I watched the door close. I can't, she said. Not about this. It feels like if I move this boundary, everything will move. I need to know where my edges are. Brooke's eyes tracked me, then flicked to the papers again like a teenager checking a mirror. I looked at the sender and the preview and I did a foolish thing. I called her in front of them. If anyone could soften a moment, it was Lena. She answered on the second ring, like she knew timing. Merry Christmas, you rebel, she said, voice warm enough to melt the window frost. Spare me your flattery, I said. I'm in my living room. Eric is here with a document he wants me to sign. It says Kayla isn't family for holidays and he gets the stockings. This is erasing. It will shatter what you think it's strengthening. Don't pretend this is a private concern when you made it a request of the community. I can't fix this for you, she said to me, and it was not a retreat so much as a truth. I can remind both of you who you are. Margaret, keep your promise. Eric, stop trying to be photographed loving and do it instead. Tyler made you something. I wanted to do what I do best. Open the door and make it warm. Bring them in, I said, and Eric's shoulders loosened for a fraction of a second. But you leave those papers in your car, and you do not touch my stockings, and you call Kayla by her name. Brooke found my note, I said, because I needed to get it out of my pocket and into the world. The one I left in your wreath. Family is who you make room for. I meant it for you, not for your followers, so hear me. You are shrinking, I said, and I did not raise my voice because truth has its own volume. You are shrinking the story until it fits into frames and into rooms where everyone looks like you and thinks like you and never spills. You are asking me to collaborate in that reduction. You want the best parts of my house, the smell of ham, the red tablecloth, the tradition that says we add a name every year, without the part where you are not in control. You want the stockings without the uneven stitch that happens when a left-handed woman gets tired but keeps going anyway. You want a grandmother who comes when she is called and who leaves when there's a board member at your door. You want to turn love into a guest you can manage? No. You make everything about your generosity, and then you act like anyone who won't clap for it is cruel. Maybe Kayla isn't supposed to be at the center of our family's Christmas. Maybe that's okay. You never know when you are becoming someone's safe place. Usually you realize it when they stand next to you in a way that says they believe you won't move. You don't have to explain me, she said, and the strength in her teenager's voice put a crack in the careful thing Brooke had brought with her. I can explain me. I'm here because they asked me to come when I didn't have anywhere. And I came. That's it. That's the whole explanation. You chose when you wrote a shot list that called me minimal and suggested the kids' table for Kayla. You chose when you put just family under a picture with 4 stockings, and you knew what message it sent. This is me choosing back. But you don't come back with those papers. And you don't come back with the word just in your mouth like a knife. He turned toward the door and Brooke with him. At the threshold, he glanced back. I'll tell the kids we'll see you tomorrow, he said, like a man managing a calendar. If you can be constructive. Merry Christmas, he said, like a formality. Merry Christmas, I said, like a blessing. After the door closed and the cold stepped in to say hello and then left again, I went to the window and watched my grandchildren wave as their parents told them something low and serious and probably incomplete. Tyler pressed his mouth to the glass again, distorted. He waved. I waved back. Madison blew a kiss and I caught it, put it in the pocket where my note had been. The house breathed. The cinnamon roll icing pooled in the corners. Kayla held the spatula out to me like she was handing me a baton. Well, she said. Well, I said back, and we smiled at each other like conspirators. I texted Darlene, because every rebellion needs a lieutenant. He came with a contract, I wrote. She sent me 5 skull emojis and then, need me to bring the emergency lasagna? Patel, tell her to bring the kids, and if you see anyone else who needs a table, send them. I called her anyway. She picked up on the second ring, which is the ring sisters pick up on, if they don't live in the same city anymore. Merry Christmas, Meg, she said, voice sunny because she moved somewhere the sun lives. I told her the short version, because the long version would turn my roles to rocks, the papers, the stockings, the claw's definition of me. She made a noise that is the sound of a sister swallowing a bad word, then said, he's scared. He keeps thinking if he draws the line one more time, the sea will stop coming. He thinks I like the mess because I live away from it. We iced the rolls like we were painting, and Kayla drew a heart with the back of a spoon on one, then laughed at herself and ate it before the heart could melt beyond recognition. I set the table with the plaid cloth, and we lit the candles even though it was morning, because sometimes candles make the air less lonely. I put the stockings on the back of the chair that would be mine, like sentries. Around 10, there was another knock. Sierra stood on the porch with a crate of tangerines I recognized from the church basement. We'd gotten a load of them from a distributor who misprinted the labels and couldn't sell them to the stores. She stomped snow off her boots and grinned. My mom's working a double, she said. The shelter's quiet for now. Thought I'd bring you these so you can pretend you're in a Christmas commercial. By noon, the house was loud with new bodies. Darlene came with a lasagna and a story about a woman in line at George's who'd tried to return a pie she'd eaten half of because the crust wasn't flaky. Mrs. Patel texted that her youngest had a fever, but that she'd set a container of samosas on her porch for us to grab if we were out. 2 teenagers from the youth group showed up with a box of ornaments they'd made out of cinnamon and glue. We strung them on the tree and the whole house smelled like a bakery. The little boys raced their trucks under the chairs, and the one with the peeling decal announced solemnly that his truck's name was Arthur, which is not a name you argue with when a 4-year-old assigns it to a matchbox. Kayla took a photo of the table from above, not for a feed, just to remember. Her eyes were shining and unashamed. I carved into the ham again and thought about the readied toast over in Westlake. Bubbles going flat, someone trying to get the lighting right when the light already was what it was. I thought of Tyler and Madison in their car seats, the way their mom had buckled them like love. I thought about the clause that told me who my family was, and then I looked up at the faces around my table and felt the exact opposite of a clause. No narrowing, just widening. The door opened without a knock around 2, the privilege of the faithful, and Pastor Lena slipped in, hair damp from snow, cheeks pink. She shook herself like a happy dog and said, "Lord, it smells like a miracle in here." She hugged Sierra, which is one of my favorite ongoing stories, and then came to me. "How are we doing?" she asked into my shoulder. "We're making room," I said, and that was all. In the swirl of plates and napkins and someone accidentally using the good towel to wipe their hands, I let it go. My phone buzzed again. Eric. The preview said, "We're coming by now, with the kids. 5 minutes." No question mark. I stood very still. The house around me moved like a merry-go-round, people going up and down and around in circles, the music a mess of laughter, and my old radio playing the carols my father loved because they had the word glad in them. Okay, I said to no one and to everyone. We're ready. Madison was more tentative because she had a candy cane and also because the world had shifted inexplicably and she was waiting to see which way to tilt to stay upright. Brooke took in the scene, eyes a camera lens whirring, and I watched her recalibrate when she saw that nothing about this would make a good thumbnail and everything about it would make a good life. Eric had the papers again. He had folded them at least, like concession or strategy. He saw the stockings, and without meaning to, his eyes softened. The K was right there, the loop a little too big, and therefore exactly right. "Smells good," he said, and it sounded like a peace offering even if he still had his sword in his hand. "It is," I said. He took a step and I recognized it, the urge to fix the discomfort by doing a thing. He reached toward the table, not for the ham, but for the stocking with his name on it, a reflex to claim something in a room that did not center him. My hand was there before his, not stopping him so much as setting a line he could see. "Don't," I said again, gentle steel. He pulled back. The entire room seemed to breathe again. "Gigi," Tyler said urgently into my shoulder. "I made you an ornament and it's at my house, but I wanted you to have it now, so I drew you one." He produced a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a circle that used to be white, now gray with travels and love, with a small stick figure with a triangle dress, and a bigger stick figure with big hair, labeled Gigi, in careful capitals that had to be explained to no one. "I love it," I said, and I meant it as an answer to more than one question. Eric stood in a house where his control did not apply and considered, for maybe the first time, that the way to not drown was to let go of the iron anchor in his hand. He put the papers on the entry table beside my mail and the catalog I had been using as a coaster because I had no intention of ordering anything from a world where all the sofas were white. "I was wrong to ask Lena to find a place for Kayla last night," he said, the words like rocks he had to spit out. "I was trying to control the optics, I'm sorry." The house found its noise again. Someone put on a record that crackled. The little boys introduced Tyler to Arthur the truck, and the three of them made sounds that would have driven me to distraction at another hour and healed me in that one. Madison gave me the candy cane and asked if she could have a cinnamon roll with no icings and yes sprinkles, which is exactly the kind of specificity all girls should be allowed. Eric stood next to the stockings for a long time, hands in his pockets like he didn't trust them not to touch. He looked at the one with his name, then at Kayla's, then at mine. He looked like a man reading a language he had spoken as a child and had to relearn. He reached into his coat and put something on the table. It was my sticky note, creased and carried and not thrown away. He smoothed it with his palm. "I found this," he said, unnecessary but different than dismissive. I pretended it didn't make sense. "It does." Brooke drifted over to the nativity, and because God has a wicked sense of humor, the wooden Joseph fell over and hit her ankle. She rubbed it, laughing, and set him back up, then tilted him so he leaned into Mary just enough to look like partnership and not codependency. "I can live with crooked," she said. Maybe to me, maybe to herself. The papers sat by the mail like the host at a party no one is speaking to. Tyler tried to pick them up because paper is irresistible to 6-year-olds and I moved them. Not to hide them, but because sometimes a boy doesn't need language in his hands yet. Eric caught my eye and shrugged. A truce. Around 3, the Maguires texted him. I know because he glanced at his phone the way guilty people glance, and then set it face down. A decision you could miss if you weren't trained as I am to see the small heroic in the middle of stupid battles. He didn't answer. He stayed. He wiped Kayla's tears once when someone told a joke so funny she cried, and it looked like habit. He handed Lena a plate and didn't try to give a toast. He laughed at a story about the time I forgot the words to "Oh, Holy Night," and faked it with a lot of vibrato and everyone thought it was intentional. "You're not signing that, are you?" Darlene murmured to me near the sink where the real talk happens. Her lipstick had faded into the kind of stain that makes her look like a 40s starlet at 2 a.m. "No," I said. I use my big girl no. When the room had thinned and the light went from gray to that blue that comes right before 4:30 in a winter that takes your daylight and asks you what you'll do with the rest. Eric came to where I stood with the stockings again. "I can't promise I won't mess this up," he said. "I have built a whole thing. It's hard to turn. The magazine is still coming out." There would be a day when Eric would call me and say the thing that finally sounded like the confession I needed. I was wrong. Not just about the specifics, but about the story. Maybe that day would come after an intervention by someone with a title. Maybe it would come because he looked at my sticky note at 3 a.m., when the house was too quiet and felt how lonely it is to sleep with rules instead of people. Maybe it would be smaller, one bowl of soup at a time. But the turning had happened. It didn't happen when I marched into a magazine shoot and flipped a table. It happened at my own, when I refused to hand over the parts of me that held the truth because someone else's camera needed more white space. It happened when he put his fingers on Kayla's stocking and I put my hand on his wrist and learned there are ways to say no, that wake up who you always were and make room for who you're becoming. After they left, no slammed doors, no flouncing, just a strange quiet that is the sound of a rope being loosened. Kayla and I stood with the stockings again. She traced her name the way she had last night, the way you do when you are making sure the ink doesn't disappear if you blink. Permanent, she said. Permanent, I echoed. And if you listened close, you could hear my mother humming in the kitchen that is now mine, and my father tapping his fork on his plate once to get attention because he was going to say grace, and he liked to be sure people heard the opening line. It's the same line every time, and it is the only one that matters when you decide to make the room bigger than the picture. Thank you for the people who made it in and the ones who are on their way, because there is always another chair. Thank you for the people who made it in and the ones who are on their way, because there is always another chair. I slept badly that night and well all at once, the kind of sleep that is deep because you have placed the weight of the world on a table and told it to behave. In the morning, the house smelled of laundromat soap and yesterday's cinnamon, and Kayla was already up, reading in the window like she was trying to memorize the edges of the day. I sat at the kitchen table with the stockings spread like a small constellation and the sticky note in my pocket. I had left the papers at the entry table in Eric's house because I couldn't think of a more honest way to keep a record of what had been offered to me. He had left mine in the entry of the same house as if he meant to archive the conflict for later reading. I called an attorney. You don't pick a lawyer the way you pick linens. You pick a person who understands that law at its best is a tool to keep people from being hurt. My neighbor from church, Pastor Lena, texted me the number of someone she trusted. Claire Reynolds, 2 syllables clipped like a hat. She met me the same day in a tiny office on the second floor of a building where the elevators smell of copier ink and someone else's coffee. Claire was 40-ish, with a blunt bob and a look that said she had been surprised by injustice before and found it boring now. I don't want to sue my son, I told her, watching the way Claire set a pen down so she could look at me properly. I don't want to be dramatic. I want to keep what's mine and protect a kid who belongs to me. You can also include an order to prevent dissemination or commercial exploitation of a minor's image if there's credible evidence he's intending to use the children for commercial promotion in a way that harms Kayla or violates privacy expectations. It's a temporary relief, an emergency stop until we have a hearing. The bullet points showing the mantle-shot stockings, no extras, line, the grandma minimal note, the idea of rerouting Kayla to the kids' table or to Pastor Lena for respite. Screen captures of Brooke's sponsored post and the caption showing traditions that matter, matching PJs, grandma's sugar cookies, stockings for 4 were another. The text messages from Eric about seating and the earlier memorandum draft on my table were another. Pastor Lena and Sierra and Darlene were witnesses. The shelter's intake log, showing that Kayla had been part of a placement and that the heirlooms were not listed as transferred to Eric by any documented instrument, was another. It'll look like you're making a fuss, Claire warned, but it will also look like you're protecting property and a child from being used or excluded for commercial optics. Judges respond to clear contemporaneous evidence. They don't get seduced by family history. They look at, did someone intend to deprive you of property or cause immediate irreparable harm? If so, we can get relief quickly. File for temporary restraining order to stay removal or sale of items and to prevent the dissemination of images of Kayla in any commercial media unless consented by the custodial parent, the child's legal guardian, and include a motion to compel the preservation of electronic communications. Claire's voice when she spoke was like a bell, practical and clean. We can seek a hearing within 24 to 48 hours if we need to. Emergency motions happen. You'll have to show immediate risk. Claire prepared the filing that afternoon. We took the printed forwarded email and the screenshots. We wrote affidavits, my own, Pastor Lena's, Sierra's, Darlene's, a short, brutal chronology of events and texts and calls, and Claire typed a demand letter for Westlake Living and Hearth and Home Partners, not as a threat so much as a statement. There is a dispute involving allegations of discriminatory targeting and non-consensual use of a minor's image. Please preserve all materials. The Raplevin petition looked like a recipe for retrieval. The heirlooms are personal property, historically in the possession of Margaret's household and not the property of Eric and Brooke. Imminent risk of dispossession evidenced by emails, messages, and attempted transfer. Ask for TRO and order requiring return or preservation. I retreated afterward. Claire said rest would be part of the strategy. The law likes to be tidy, and you do not want your emotions to file for you. I went to the shelter and sat in the back where the children had left drawings of astronauts and unicorns on the wall. I made sandwiches and filled thermoses and let someone else pour coffee into my mug because the act of serving steadies me. Kayla sat at a corner bench and did mock SATs and told jokes that weren't funny except to her and me, which was enough. Meanwhile, Claire did what good lawyers do. She moved quietly and inexorably. The court clerk called at the end of the day. We had an emergency hearing the next morning. The judge's calendar had room. When Eric saw the process server approach his door with a clipboard and pinched expression, something in him wilted. He had at first been amused. Documenting was a game with margins he had learned to control. But when I emailed him the docket number that afternoon, he finally felt the cold of paperwork. He called frantically. Claire did not take his calls. Professionally, she could, but strategically, she didn't. The petition had to run its course. Show up in court with witnesses. Lay out facts. I watched him from the shelter kitchen that morning as he arrived, hair longer at the temples from stress, hands that had cut too quickly into a roll. He did not come in. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the children through the window. Then he paced and used his phone. I watched him try to marshal his usual calm by setting his jaw like an able man must. The hearing itself was brief in the way dramatic things can be, short because the facts were brutal in their simplicity. Claire presented the email and the screenshots, the texts about seating and the memorandum draft. Pastor Lena and Sierra attested to what they'd been asked, and I gave my affidavit about the stockings and their history. The judge, a woman with a tired gavel and a compassionate face, listened closely to the part about imminent harm. Claire argued that the heirlooms were unique, irreplaceable, and in immediate danger of being removed from the jurisdiction and possibly used as props in a commercial context that would deprive the family collective of their stewardship. She also argued that the forwarded email and social media posts demonstrated purpose and a pattern of exclusion that put Kayla at imminent risk of being publicly sidelined for the sake of an advertiser narrative. Eric had a lawyer, fancy stationery, a tie that suggested an afternoon on a yacht. He argued that nothing had been stolen, that emotionally fraught family decisions did not rise to the level of legal intervention, that he was the homeowner and it was his right to display items there. He insisted there was no intent to deprive me, that the memorandum had been a good faith attempt to create clarity. There's a credible allegation here that the child's image is being curated for commercial use in a way that was never discussed with the child's guardians. That's not small. The order prohibited Eric or Brooke from removing, concealing, transferring, or otherwise disposing of the identified items. The court also issued a preservation order for all electronic communications between the parties, and an instruction that the Westlake Living magazine and any associated advertisers must preserve their editorial materials and refrain from using images of Kayla commercially, without express custodial consent. The judge's face when she read it was neither victory nor defeat. It was a small, crisp correction. Claire served the order that afternoon. Eric stood on his porch and read it with his children at his side, faces framed like ornaments. He looked at the judge's signature, calm official authority, and for the first time since I had borne him in a hospital hallway with my knees shaking, I saw him small. He was not a man suddenly cruel. He was a man who had been given an instruction he hadn't wanted to hear and was now trying to figure out how to respond. The tactic worked. It had to. Claire had filed for immediate relief rather than for public theater. Meanwhile, she also sent the demand letter to Westlake Living and Hearth and Home's legal department. The magazine's lawyer called Claire within the hour, anxious about liability and reputation. "We don't want to be associated with anything that looks like exclusion or exploitation," he said, strategically swallowing whatever advertising numbers warmed his breakfast. The fallout was swift in the way modern reputations are brittle. An associate at Hearth and Home called Brooke, quiet and professional. "Our brand partners require us to avoid controversy," she said, and asked for clarification on the public post that mentioned traditions that matter, and then asked to postpone any run featuring families until any dispute was resolved. Bloggers that had been on the margins of Brooke's orbit wrote that inclusivity was in vogue. A small influencer community that had ties to them posted notes about ethical content creation. Social media, that amphitheater of petty justice, did what it does best. It amplified. Some criticized me, some defended. But the magazine, wary of a legal entanglement and an ethics complaint, halted the piece. Eric woke up to this and panicked. He called his boss. He called his mother. He called me. The calls were split between defensiveness and pleading. When Claire advised me to let Eric have the line and to keep calm, I did. I let the phone ring. I did not answer everything, because part of the legal strategy was not merely law but exhaustion. People who would otherwise act on impulse would think twice when confronted with quiet, bureaucratic force. There is a mercy in paperwork when it protects the small. It is not always elegant. For 2 days, I kept my distance. I went to the shelter each morning and sat in a corner where paper cranes hung from the ceiling and listened to stories. Kayla helped Sierra file coats. Darlene brought over a casserole and rumor about Brooke's manager crying in a public Starbucks. I knit, because hands that have been taught to stitch do better when they are making something rather than unmaking words. Eric did not come to the shelter. He stayed at his house and tried to stage what he thought of as recovery. Calls to his PR person, an apology draft that read like a resignation letter from humanity. Brooke cried and edited, and the two of them rehearsed humility like actors practicing a new scene. I let them. There was brilliance in stepping back. Margaret had yelled and said the hard words. She had held her ground in the kitchen. But the judge's order was the authoritative voice she needed on the record. There is power in a document because other people nod at documents and respect them. The TRO had given me time and clarity. In that time, Eric's desperation became more visible. Without my phone calls to soothe him and without my attendance to perform the role of the supportive, he started to show more of himself. His fear, his social anxiety, his hunger to be pristine in the eyes of his community. Claire told me that in family disputes, small acts of moral cowardice habitually look like reason when you watch them long enough. Without the possibility of quick edits and staged photographs, the true thing shows. On the third day, I returned to his house with Claire and Pastor Lena and the paperwork in a manila folder like a placard. I did not storm in, I walked. Claire advised this. The judge's order had been served, but the point now was to close the loop, show Eric the court's intervention, and to offer an out that allowed him to save something other than his vanity. I found him in the foyer, hovering near the entry table where the rejected papers from earlier still lay like a confession. He looked up when I came in. For a second, the room held all the small decisions he'd made, the ones that had seemed like sensible compromises, and had gradually carved out an exclusion. "Mom," he said. The word had a desperate, pleading angle to it. I set the folder on the table and opened it. The order was neat and efficient. The judge's name was there. The preservation demand was enclosed. Claire explained, in jargon that was digestible, "This is not a punishment. This is an instruction to preserve the status quo while the court sorts title and usage. You may agree today to a mediated settlement that would preserve the heirlooms in place and include a family agreement about inclusion and use. Or we can litigate. Litigation would be expensive, public, messy, and likely to hurt children." He looked at the judge's signature and then at me. The rawness was back, his childness. "You could have just told me to stop," he said, like a confession. "You tried to," I said. "I told you what I felt. You heard it like criticism. That's the maddening part. You thought your climb was threatened by pieces of thread, and instead you were just afraid of feeling small in public." Claire proposed mediation, offered a draft of a family agreement that would ensure that heirlooms stay treated with respect, and that any commercial use of images or stories involving minors would require written guardian consent. And she suggested a clause about including Kayla in key holiday events, unless all parties mutually agreed on a different plan, which would be documented and not unilateral. The language was dry and legal. But it gave Eric an exit that allowed him to keep dignity. The legal dignity of compromise rather than the brittle dignity of domination. He hesitated. There is an odd courage it takes to let a judge stop you, and then to admit you were wrong in front of a person you have loved. "I don't want the magazine to think I'm a monster," he said finally, as if that explained the rest. "You won't be a monster because you try to do better," I told him. "You will be a better person if you try to make a table that includes instead of excludes. It's not performance, it's habit." The stockings would remain in my custody unless a mutual agreement was reached. Any commercial use of the children's images would require express written permission from both parents, and no use of Kayla without the explicit consent of her legal custodian. And both families would commit to a restorative conversation with Pastor Lena and a counselor over the coming months to repair the harm done. Brooke, to her credit and to the surprise of a few of us who had already written her off as an Instagram project, stayed. She read the agreement and signed it too. "I don't want to exclude people," she said. "I want my kids to grow up feeling safe." I didn't realize the way my fear of chaos made me think excluding was safety. She didn't sound glossy. She sounded human. The papers were not thunderbolts. They were ink and intent. They would not guarantee perfect behavior, but they created consequences. Claire filed the mediation notes with the court and drafted the settlement to be entered as a consent order. The TRO would remain in place pending the final filing and would be replaced by the consent order that evening. In the eyes of the law, the heirlooms were safe. In the eyes of my heart, Kayla was safe. People shifted. Pastor Lena published a short note on the church bulletin and a longer post on a local Facebook page about hospitality and the way congregations sometimes get co-opted into other people's narratives, small pointed words that helped people connect the dots without feeling preached at. Sierra and Darlene shouted me coffee and poured congratulations like gravy. The shelter volunteers brought more hands and more invitations. A woman from the neighborhood stopped by with a tin of cookies and said, "We should have more of this," meaning the table. I found myself blinking a little at the ordinary generosity of being supported. There was still fallout for the well-branded. The magazine issued a quiet statement, "We encourage inclusive storytelling," and took the piece offline to edit. Hearth & Home's PR team shifted a sponsored post and did what brand managers do. They pivoted away from content they believed might damage the company's image. For Eric, there was an immediate reputational cost that tasted like shame. He paid it. He also did something harder. He let the shame be the teacher instead of the hammer. The final act of this theater was small and private. After the consent order was signed and the coffee had finally cooled, Claire had an offering. "You have to decide where you want to leave the stockings," she said. "It's your property. The court will record custody, but it's also a moral decision." I chose the shelter. It felt right. The heirloom stockings would be displayed on the mantel in the shelter's common room, a small plaque beside them telling their history. My mother's hand, my father's laugh, the year Richard died, the boy who used to sleep on the couch after being locked out. Kayla's stocking would hang there next to them, permanent not because of policy, but because of the people who would walk by it and remember. The evening we moved them, Pastor Lena and Sierra and Darlene and a few kids from the youth group carried the cedar chest down the hallway. We set the plaid tablecloth over the small entry table and hung the stockings like flags. The children clapped when Kayla's stocking went up, not glancing at a camera for an angle, but because their friend's name fluttered into the room. A little boy named Arthur, no one could ever argue with Arthur, placed a paper star on the mantel, and then ran to the couch to declare that the mantel had been officially christened. When it was done, I sat on a low chair with my hands in my lap and let the new quiet settle in. Claire had stayed and leaned against the doorway like someone who would like to stay in the room where good things happen. Eric came a little later, quietly, with Tyler and Madison at his heels. He stood a step back and watched as a dozen people made quiet banter about ham or the best way to warm cinnamon rolls. He did not try to claim anything. He came in and sat and let himself be present. "Thank you," he said to me, awkward and wholly sincere. He did not have to mean forever. He meant this minute. I didn't see it like I should have. He picked up a paper ornament Tyler had made and smiled. Small. "I'll do the dishes," he offered, as a domestic sacrifice that was both practical and penitential. The catharsis was not cinematic. It was a realignment. We did the dishes together, and the sink filled with soap and stories. Kayla told Arthur how to make a ramp for his trucks out of a rolled-up magazine. Tyler explained the science of the Lego rockets to anyone who would pretend to understand. People taught other people the easy arts of being present. Later that night, when Kayla and I were the last ones at the shelter, she asked me if we'd ever hang more stockings, maybe for people who weren't there yet. "We always will," I said. "That's the whole point." I thought of my mother's handwritten bands, the wrong-handedness of them, the slight tremor in the thread that made it warmer. The court had given me a document and in doing so had lent weight to what I'd always felt. Inclusion is not optional if you love someone. The legal order had been an instrument, imperfect, formal, necessary. The victory was plain. The stockings stayed where they belonged. The children were shielded from being used as props for someone else's brand. And the family learned, the hard way, that small cruelties can be stopped by a thing as simple as a judge's signature, and as human as a mother refusing to be edited. In the coming months, there were conversations, less newsworthy than I had feared. Eric and Brooke came to a counseling group and learned to listen without editing. They didn't become saints overnight. They argued, they posted, they made mistakes, but there were fewer walls. Once, ironically, the magazine ran a small holiday piece about unusual family traditions in town. It featured a photo of a mantle that had 5 stockings and a caption that read, "Traditions make room." It wasn't a cover story. It didn't have to be. It was enough. When spring came, Claire sent a simple email. The consent order had been entered, the case closed. "You did this with grace," she wrote, and I felt the humility of doing right. It was not the drama I had expected. The grand scene had been replaced by 1,000 small mercies. One Sunday, Pastor Lena and I sat with our feet in the garden behind the church and stitched. She had brought a spool of thread. I had the old stomach ache of a mother who had given more than she had record of. We talked about boundaries and hospitality and the way the world asks you to perform niceness when there's work to be done. "You did good," she said, and I felt the weight of the seasons in it. "You made a table." Darlene brought lasagna, and the kids brought ornaments, and the night had the soft, honest gray Cleveland reserves just for holidays. Eric and Brooke came in the afternoon. The stockings stayed at the shelter mantle, where they were meant, I decided, because the house that needed them most was the one that made room for people as they were, not as polished pictures. I carried a small replica of the heirloom that Claire insisted on. Legal copies for the house, she called them. A peace offering for the people who wanted his kids to have the story on their mantle as well. Kayla sat on the couch with her head on my shoulder and said, "We did it." We had defended a principle that sometimes gets lost, that families are not photo shoots. They are messy and continual and insist on the inclusion of the small and the inconvenient. If this story moved you, please like and share. Tell me in the comments, where would you draw the line when someone tries to edit your family into a neat picture? Have you ever had to fight for someone to be seen as part of your home? Your stories matter. Leave them below. And if you want more stories about small acts that hold people together, subscribe. We'll pull up another chair.